Hey everyone, welcome to another wonderful Whiskey Wednesday at Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk tabletop, video game dev, and all things Gundam. Joining me as always is my cunning co-host Adam Blue from the Gundam Explained YouTube channel. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. Again, thanks for having me. This is always a ton of fun. Tons to talk about with today's topic. But yeah, super excited, man. Yeah, and I see you got your whiskey. I, of course, have my seltzer water. This one is specifically peach and honey. It's quite
Oh,
delicious,
that
actually.
sounds good. I
Yeah.
actually I just finished a can of are you familiar with Spindrift? It's like a seltzer.
Oh, it's another one of those brands.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They have a flavor that's like a strawberry lemonade that
Oh,
I just
oh,
polished
that's
off
good.
here before we started streaming. So
Okay, well, cool. I feel like I'm cheating with these seltzer waters sometimes
yeah.
because it's like it's they're delicious, but it's just water.
When's the other shoe gonna drop on us?
Yeah.
Microplastics. No. Yeah,
Yeah.
I am of course your host, Steven, aka Midnight Hatter, and tonight we have I think a pretty interesting topic to dive into. I think we're gonna get a lot of mileage out of it because there's a lot of opinions out there apparently that I've discovered.
Are there on the internet? Really?
Who would have thought? Um, what's up to everybody in the chat? Adam, I see you
Yeah.
commenting in the chat. Zeonic Shadow, good to have you, buddy. If I'd known that you were going to be here early, I would have worn my Zeonic Shadow merch. Magus, good to see you as well.
Yeah. That's,
So again, before we dive into the topic of the night, just a few updates on things that I've got going on. So on the one hand, a couple weeks ago, released that video kind of covering saving and loading data from a Google spreadsheet. I've begun integrating that into the Gundam 5e website. I'm hoping that within the next week or so, definitely before the birth of of my child,
yeah.
the Gundam 5e website will have the ability to, upload, save, and load character sheets, just like a D&D Beyond type proxy. And obviously, like, you see I've got tons of baby stuff in the background here. Like things are getting down to the wire. but
Wow.
but yeah, so that's something that I'm working on for the Gundam 5e website. Additionally, I did want to share, and this is something that I'm actually going to be looking for opinions on. This is what I would like to call the least mobile suit of the Universal Century. This is the high grade flight type Goof custom.
Wow. Where did you find it?
So this guy I've had for a while. I
Oh,
built
okay.
him like a couple weeks ago, but I've yet to decide what to do with him because, and this is the one that's not the 21st century real type version high grade. This is like the old school high grade, and
Oh,
it is. I mean, you really can't pose it at all.
oh. Why does it fall apart, or is it just the joints are just?
So, in addition to the legs being obviously massive, the skirt is a fixed skirt around, so you really can't, spread the legs or lift the legs at all. In fact, if you try to lift the legs, you'll find that the pelvis pops right out of the hips, for no reason at all. So
Yeah, I think a lot of older ones do that, don't they?
yeah, I think that the older Goof Custom does the same thing. So I
Oh,
definitely, if you have any suggestions for how I ought to customize or decorate this kit, definitely drop them in the chat or drop them in the comments below because I'm kind of at a loss. I already gave him this kind of like tiny machine pistol, which I think came off of the high grade Grays from IBO. But
oh. So that's not canonical then.
no.
What are you doing? No,
Oh no, don't tell Twitter that I did that.
no. One thing that came in mind immediately is that the weapon that it has on it, like the shield. Is that like the shield Gatling on that, or something
It
similar?
is. But what's
That
interesting is that this particular version of that shield Gatling is all one piece instead of being,
something that like comes out, or
yeah.
that might be worth detailing itself, like the barrels of it, putting like the chrome on it. I think that would make it stand
Oh
out.
yeah, my method. We've got well, I don't have the silver Sharpie handy, but I've got the gold
Oh
Sharpie.
yeah. Okay. See, I'd love to see you. Yeah, use the Sharpie on that because I want to check out what the details would be like.
Yeah, but I think that this is one of those kits that I would like to do something with the waist to give it either some like ab crunch or some hip twist or something like that.
The only thing I could think of is if there is some sort of model kit out there that has a good waist system that's cheap and easy to modify.
Yeah.
I, it was something I built recently. Was it the Sandrock high grade? Had an excellent waist system. Oh, even the ground type Gundam has, and I think it might even be the Mark II also, where it has like a vertical ball joint.
Yeah, it's like an L-shaped ball joint, right? Where you've got like a 1 and then 2.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it comes up, and then I meant to say horizontal. Yeah, that's right, because it like plugs in. Yeah, that kind of helps.
I think that'll probably be the way to go because right now, I mean, it's just a glorified statue. There's
I hate that, but
additionally, so that's the Gundam 5e update, that's the Gunpla update. I am planning on picking up my old Gunpla and chill streams. So, probably during the day, weekdays, while you're crunching away at work, you'll be able to watch me tinker with some of these Gunpla, and yeah, I'm gonna try and start doing that next week. We'll see.
That'd be cool. That'd be some nice background vibes.
Yeah,
having that going.
Yeah, and I always enjoy the chat on those streams because it's a little bit more interactive than what you and I do here, where we're kind of more presenting ideas.
Exactly. Yeah, going through topics. Yeah.
And on that note, I will probably be polishing up these guys. These are, I mentioned this last week. I was going ahead and 3D printing some stamped molds, to address the problem of the expensive water slide decals. I wanted to have silicone stamp molds so that I could make silicone stamps to create some of the decals that are pretty common. Like, it's not great for numbers and things like that. I've got plenty of water slides that are just straight up numbers. But for something like a Xeon logo, you figure just make a stamp and print it on. The first experiment with casting that in silicone, and you're probably not going to be able to see it too well, didn't go to plan. I do have.
This is just too fine of detail to really.
Yep, you nailed it. It's too small to really capture those details, and I did have a little bit of that curing inhibition that comes with trying to cast a silicone mold in a resin 3D print. But really, that's not the problem here, because obviously it did sink into the mold a little bit. Like, you can see that there's a little bit of a stamp there, but the rest of it didn't quite capture those details, and it's really sticky still, so I'm holding it on a needle.
Oh, okay.
But
man, otherwise, you know what? Just looking at that makes me think how you could replicate effect parts. I think that's a good idea. Measuring the connector pieces on various, not only Gunpla but Robot Spirits, and then create a line of effect pieces.
Oh yeah. Well, and one of my biggest complaints of older, not necessarily high grade, but 1/44th scale kits is, have you ever opened up one of those older 1/44th scale kits and the beam saber is not a beam saber effect part? It's just a piece of like white plastic that's attached to a hand.
Yep,
you know exactly what I'm talking about. So imagine if you made a silicone mold of that, and then you cast it in clear resin, and then you could paint the hand whatever color you want, but you still get the clear resin effect part.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good, because I do have a couple kits, especially some F91 kits that they haven't reproduced of the bad guys, the Crossbone Vanguard before being Modern Crossbone.
Yeah, F91 and Crossbone, for that matter, get zero love when it comes to Gunpla.
Yeah.
Unless you count the F90. The F90, they've obviously.
I know.
They love the
that
F90.
One gets so many iterations. There's like 2 packs, tons of accessories. Yeah.
So yeah, I
Hey,
think
what's up, Ian?
my next experiment with the Gundam stamps is going to be to take these prototypes that I made out of resin, and I'm gonna try and make a mold out of plasticine clay.
Oh, okay. Wow.
We'll
I bet
see.
you've been doing your research then, huh? Finding like the best material because things at that level of detail do exist in the world. So it's just a matter of finding the correct materials and process to
Exactly.
produce it.
Yeah, finding a way to DIY my own little Gundam factory over here.
Dude, I'm all in for that. That's
Yeah, Zeonic Shadow. It is from 8th MS team, that flight type goof
yeah.
goof custom legs. Yeah, the goof custom legs would probably slim it up a little bit, slim up the profile. Ian, good to see you in the chat. um Ultronimus says they figured out what worked and ran with it like a Hasbro toy line.
Yeah.
Looking for some good claw hands for my build. So I don't know, Adam, are you familiar with what Zeonic Shadow's working on here?
Yeah, I've been seeing on Instagram posts of a build. I don't know if it's of the Epion or something else that's custom going on.
Yeah, it's a big Epion custom project. So
Because I know the and here I'm going to show off. This is the Robot Spirits version, but it had I was just decaling this week actually because the older Robot Spirits come with decals, but the claws on this custom, they do have a lot high grade custom version, and it has a claw that has a lot of articulation to it, where you can kind of, and I think the size of it too, it's actually quite big compared to a Gunpla, so that could
yeah,
actually work potentially. And then also the Bound Dock, obviously there's a high grade of that. It's a little pricey. That has the claw.
or the mobile worker from the Origin.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I had a pipe dream where I would take my Double Zeta high grade and the mobile worker high grade and create the Gump from Gundam
Oh,
Crossbone.
yeah, Judo's yeah, his later double Zeta custom or whatever.
Yeah. So
And then I think there's another mobile armor that has a claw arm. Isn't it look like a shark or something? What am I thinking?
is
Is
that
that
the
in
Zacrello
Thunderbolt? Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
or the Grublo?
Yeah, that's something that hasn't been explored too much. I'm gonna have to look into those a little more.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting claw arm mobile suits out there. That would be an interesting topic for the Gundam Explained podcast.
Yeah.
Discussion about claw armed mobile
Claw
suits.
arms.
So
Yeah, because there's a lot of different ones. Some of them seem to, yeah, it seems weird at first, and then when you watch it in anime, it's like some of it seems pretty sick. Like in Unicorn,
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. It's
Oh,
almost
the
like
Banshee,
slasher
yeah.
film stuff going on. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
That's
and
pretty
so
cool.
you had mentioned to me in private that the decals on that Robot Spirits kit were nearly a decade old.
Yeah, and because I bought it, I think new, but because it had the tape on it and everything, and inside, these older Robot Spirits had the decals, the real type markings you would put on if you'd like to, and usually it's like if you're going to put on decals on something, one, you want them to be water slide, so luckily it was, but I had to take my time. They were really brittle. Even putting them and soaking them in water, when I would try to get them off with the Q-tip, it just did not want to come off. I had to really work at it, but I I appreciate, I guess, that it was like that because it made me take my time, because the Robot Spirits are more expensive, and then I'm
True.
using the decals and I want to use them properly, and luckily it worked out. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Um yeah, Ian is saying, did they ever make a high grade like that Cancer and Wing?
Cancer and
I
Pulse?
don't.
I don't think so.
Yeah, because I looked that up shortly after watching Wing because I was into one of them. I think it was the Taurus or something.
I wanted
I already
Aries so
forget, but
bad.
oh, maybe it was that. But there's not a lot out there.
Yeah.
Not a lot of different wingsuits.
No
Yeah.
love for Wing, unless you want the Serpent.
I mean, hey, if you want the main 5 Gundams or whatever, they're everywhere.
Except the Shenlong.
Oh, really? Is that one hard to
No,
come
that
across?
was just like the long running meme that it's like, oh, we've got every Gundam from the 5 except the Shenlong, and then
yeah, in the series, yeah, when that would happen, yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
but yeah, so Gundam aside, let's move into
Yeah.
our sort of video game topic du jour because I think we're gonna.
Cool.
I rest assured we are going to get into the weeds on this one because I think that
Yeah.
this is one of those things that it's a contentious topic, and um, you know, like you said, people on the internet have opinions. Uh, I personally, and I mentioned this on Twitter, I call this accessibility in video games, but not the euphemism version of accessibility, which is, hey, we want an easy mode in Souls games. Um,
Oh yeah.
which I know you would agree, like that's the design of the game. Like, leave that
Yeah.
alone. What
Exactly.
I'm talking about is for us old guys whose eyes are not quite in tune the same way as like a 9 or 10 year olds be playing video games. No. I'm kidding, of course, but in earnest, I wanted to talk about video game UI and UX for that matter. If a lot of people use UX and UI interchangeably, but really there's
Right.
a slight difference in that UI is the visual representation of the UX, right? UX
Right.
is total user experience versus UI being the visual um, you know,
Right.
user interaction. So this is something that came to me fairly recently. Well, yeah, fairly recently. Most games, I think, do a great job with their UI. It's almost like they contract with web developers to make sure that they have like their buttons in the right place,
Hmm.
everything is legible, and that kind of thing. But one of the trends that I've sort of noticed over time is that as video game resolution increases and we start getting more powerful machines, we start getting faster PCs with bigger GPUs, we start getting next gen consoles. One of the things that you're running into is a lot of people are designing video games as if you're going to be playing them on a monitor that's a foot in front of your face instead of a
Yeah.
television that is, maybe 6 feet away.
Yep.
And so what I've run into recently is that a lot of RPGs in particular tend to have what I would consider sloppy AI or sloppy UI, and then no options change it, which I think, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but ultimately I think that the solution, I'm going to lead our question with the answer. The answer is obviously to introduce more customization into your game where a user can go into the options and say, I want larger text. I want buttons in bright colors because I'm colorblind. Or I
Yep.
want high contrast filters, things like that. Um,
Yep.
but what I've noticed is that a lot of games are really designing for a very particular audience and not so much a demographic, but just people that consume the video game in a very particular way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But I'm sure you're going to show examples.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because when I did a little Google search on the
Uh huh.
old uh, okay, good. Sorry, I my OBS flared up at me for some reason. It was angry.
Oh.
So when I did a quick Google search on bad video game AI or UI, man, I'm gonna
You
mix
want?
up
Yeah.
AI and UI a lot tonight. Just
It's all
fair
right. I'll
warning.
keep you in check.
So when I did a search on bad UI, the first result I got was Mass Effect Andromeda, which I
Okay.
personally
Now,
go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say I haven't played that. Is that, and you were about to say personally, so is that a universal thing where generally on the internet people say, we can't stand this?
Yeah, even people that defend the game as far as its story goes and as far as the graphics and the gameplay goes,
Yeah.
even people that defend those aspects of the game tend to have a negative view of the user experience for Mass Effect Andromeda. And I think a lot of it probably has to do with just the graphical elements and the way things are shaped. You know, and this might just be coming from Western audiences where we are kind of conditioned to read things top to bottom, left to right.
Hmm.
You look at a menu screen like this where you're trying to upgrade your character, and you have a lot of different inputs, and you've got a lot of different, sort of icons that represent different things. You've got, your stats kind of laid out around your character, as opposed to the character. You don't necessarily need the character front and center when you are modifying their stats, right? You kind of
Right.
want the focus to be on the stats themselves. The image of the character, you should probably push that to the side and focus on everything being, you know, what you're actually trying to customize versus
Yeah.
trying to frame the character with the important information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And we've seen evolutions of that. I think that kind of thing started with like older RPGs where you'd go into a menu and there'd be a silhouette of your character and maybe around it some armor. And then
Yeah.
as these games sort of progressed, sometimes that would be removed entirely and it would just be like, here are the slots or whatever that you want to put things in for your character. And then sometimes it would be that then the way the interface works changes. Like Destiny added this sort of mouse control in a way, even on the console and the menus, because it would be that little
Cursor.
cursor that you're moving around. And then some other games tried to adopt it just because of it being familiar with Destiny, but they didn't tune it to feel right. I think Outriders is a recent third person action game that came out that adopted that, but it just didn't feel right because the Bungie was probably trying to perfect an element of the UI to make it functional, whereas others took that as the visual and wanted to apply that, but missing the point.
Yeah.
And I think that's then what happens about the missing the point is sometimes these menu systems when you're upgrading your character or equipping your character, it's like they want you to see what you're unlocking for your character and how your character's looking. And then that is sometimes it's developing over the nature of the functionality.
Right.
And gets in the way.
Because I mean, if you're playing an RPG, typically if you're trying to create an optimized build, you want your character to be equipped with the best gear. And the more complicated your gear is, obviously, the more different values you're going to have to communicate over a smaller space. So, if this breastplate not only does this evasion, has this much defense, has this durability, has this resistance to these damage types, the more complicated you're going to make your game, the more important it is to focus on the functionality of that piece as opposed to the visuals. Because we know, like from memes, that people will run around in a chicken suit if it's got 99% damage reduction and like
Yeah, exactly.
you know
Yeah, have you either heard of or played Lost Ark?
I have not
It
played
was
Lost Ark.
okay. That action RPG that came from Korea. It was released this year in the US. You've heard of it, right?
I've heard of it, yes.
Okay. And it's very interesting what they did with this game when they released it because it had been out for a while in Korea. It came out in the United States. And so it's a typical action RPG like Diablo is what everyone knows is Torchlight and I think Grim Dawn is a good example of a high quality action RPG. But what Lost Ark did was they made it where it was made to be used with a gamepad in mind, even if you just wanted to use mouse and keyboard.
Yep.
So on the gamepad, you can hold down the right trigger or right bumper and a button in order to get to a sub menu that would normally you would have to use your keyboard or hotkey into. But at the same time, they made it where while you can use the controller to play, you can also use the mouse along with it while you're using the controller because there's some functions of the menu system that are part of the main game UI as you're playing. So I can navigate with the mouse while I'm moving my character to the next place. Yeah, I'm like navigating like the quests or what to do while then I'm moving my character to just keep going. And to me, that was a change. It was a developer uniting mouse, keyboard, gamepad, but then the player could choose whatever one they want. But they made each one very intuitive and to have all. I remember in the past thinking, how would you play World of Warcraft on a console?
Good.
Because the menu system is asking for a mouse and keyboard,
Yeah.
but now I think it's almost like the world has changed to where we can grasp the concept of mouse controls, like Destiny's menu where you're using a cursor. That's like a mouse, but you're using the gamepad.
Well, and like
Yeah,
you said, I mean that's a whole. We could definitely get into the whole topic of gamepad controls versus mouse and keyboard because
yeah,
you know it would be impossible for me to envision playing a game like Ocarina of Time on a mouse and keyboard where you would have to like
yeah,
hold your targeting button while you're aiming and while you're. I think that obviously the mouse and keyboard offers the benefit of macros and you have the ability to hotkey things, but
yeah.
the gamepad offers the flexibility of multiple inputs all at the same time.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's that I think that would probably be the next gen of next gen gaming, is trying to
yeah.
incorporate a control scheme that not only considers both gamepad and mouse and keyboard controls, but almost leans into them in a way.
Yeah, in fact, like it could even be that voice recognition ends up being a bigger deal. I mean, sometimes I think a lot of gamers, if they're not, it's like if you're playing with people online, you're going to be talking, that's going to overdo the voice
Right.
or whatever. But if sometimes gamers are using headsets, don't want to make noise anyway, so you don't want to keep talking. But I think it's like with touchscreen controls when touch phones first came out, we were like, no way.
Yeah. I
And
need my keyboard.
yeah, but by now most of us have been able to use it. And so I think that can happen with even voice on gaming. So
That's
you
true.
can say quickly like, equip head latest gear or yeah, you know what I mean?
And
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 so
it
then all of a
started as a
sudden the
gimmick,
latest
right?
pickup.
Because you had like the
Yeah.
Alien Isolation, which you used your voice
Oh,
controls,
yeah.
where it was like if
Yeah.
you made noise, the alien would hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, for navigating a menu, that'd be pretty interesting.
Goose in the chat says you typically need a TV 3 times larger than a laptop screen to play next gen games. Yes, I agree with that. That is my biggest
Yeah.
complaint here. Andromeda has the worst UI. Um, I don't. I'm gonna challenge that. Wait till you see some of the other examples I have queued up here. GTA Online also has a cursor for fictional internet that is on console. I believe that generally anytime you have a meta input system where like, you know, you're a character controlling something in the game as the person that's controlling the character in the game,
Mm,
whenever you introduce that step of removed application, you're going to have issues, right? Like,
yeah.
if you're trying to like Google something as a character in a game as a person that's playing the game on a PS4, it's not the same as just going to your own Google and Googling something.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, and it's interesting the thing with the size of text because I gotta say I've been lucky where that has never bothered me, but I remember always seeing examples of it. I think Dead Rising was an early example of that because that was when Xbox 360 was mainly transitioning to HD, or there was a lot of like these things will be HD, and then the text that would pop up would be high definition, so small. It's like
Yeah.
I guess they weren't determined. They were determining the what to scale it to would be the mass, which is probably still SD. Not realizing that on some HD, people wouldn't be able to see the size of the text. And not only with the size, but there's a lot of times where you can just tell by a AAA, AA developer, etc. Sometimes you can tell like it's a good game. This is a good, menu UI, but the menu could be better. And Rebellion, who made Sniper Elite 5 or the Zombie Army games, I always felt their menu system was lacking. Like you could tell this wasn't a AAA title, even though that could just be my experience of playing so many games. But I noticed with the Sniper Elite 5, they used the Hitman menu system where you load in and there's these blocks you scroll through, which is really just an iteration of the PlayStation 3 UI,
Yep.
where that when that PlayStation 3 UI came out, that was a big deal. Like people consider that like even a modern workable like UI menu system.
And that's a good point to bring up, is the fact that a lot of times what we define as a good UI really comes down to just what is most popular at the time. Because even a system that is well designed, that's easy to navigate, might clash with our sort of internal biases of like, well, I know how the PS4 menu works because I played the PS3 and I know how the PS3 menu works. And therefore you kind of like start extrapolating out, well, so then I scroll through these tabs and then I go to this menu item, and
Yeah.
so if you were to introduce something different, like say for instance you had vertically oriented tabs that you navigate through that had sub tabs that were vertically oriented,
Yeah.
you might lose one of your players. And in fact, I do have an example queued up of just that. One of my favorite games, Fable.
Mm.
This game was one that the menu UI was completely horizontally tabbed out, and what you would experience is, as you would sort of click into particular menus, then the horizontal menu would expand, and so you'd almost lose some of the top and bottom of what you were looking at. So let's say, for example, you've got your main menu, your save load, your inventory, and your quit game. If you click into your inventory, all of a sudden, because the menu expands,
Mm.
you don't get to see some of those top level items anymore, and you're kind of a little too deep into it to navigate back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? That's a good point. Man, what was I playing recently where because here's the thing with in video games right now it seems like the universal thing is left trigger is to aim. It seems
It
like it
is.
doesn't matter. But some things that are not universal, it doesn't make sense to me. Like if I go into the options of a game in the settings, it's crazy sometimes how the words to express settings, options, configuration, it's different among games. And then sometimes it's like, okay, I need to click settings, controller settings, go to invert. Then it's sometimes it's a toggle. Sometimes you move left or right. Sometimes it's yes, no, even though it's just one question, but different among games. And then even if I decide what to do, sometimes it'll prompt, are you sure? Or sometimes I have to save on that menu screen, but sometimes you don't have to save
Right.
on
Sometimes
that
it
menu
just
screen.
remembers what you did.
And so I feel like I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, that the industry as a whole would have adopted some sort of standard for a menu system, which is exactly what happened to the Xbox arcade games. Like the Xbox Live arcade games all had a mandatory menu system that all had to be the same. It even had how to play and controls. And now lately, I don't think that's been mandatory from Xbox Live arcade games anymore because now they're just games. There's no more that label Xbox Live Arcade.
Right.
Um, but the fact that left trigger is to aim on every game, even adding it into Halo, but they don't have a consistent menu system. Because I'm telling you, there's sometimes where I'll play a game and it's like, okay, I gotta spend my time in the menu system. Where are the display options for certain settings? Where is the invert going to be? Is it going to be in game options or is it going to be in control settings? And yeah,
Now,
it's that whole thing.
are you the kind of guy that plays inverted camera, or do you play?
Yeah, I'm an inverted guy all the way. And I know how it started. It was my first like 3D game experience was X-wing and Tie Fighter on PC with the
I
joystick.
love
So
the X-wing and Tie Fighter
yeah,
series.
so I remember playing that with a joystick, always up and down. So then once
Flight
I
simulators
started
in
using,
general use inverted.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that stuck to me once mouse was introduced in PC gaming, like for first person shooters. Oh, well, and I mean, used a mouse in Doom, but I guess when 3D first person shooters came out, when you would look around, and I want to say it might have been Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, or maybe a game before that where they introduced the mouse. And then I remember thinking the same way as a joystick. It's I pull back, like I'm pulling my head back to look up.
Yep.
I'm pushing my head forward to look down, and it's just stuck with me ever since.
That's so funny, man. Yeah, like
It,
so it's crazy because in flight simulators, I play
yeah,
inverted, but when I'm playing a first-person shooter game, I play standard. Or well, I don't want to say standard. I want to say like what would you even call that? Because it's not technically, and this is funny, kind of like,
yeah,
insider baseball when it comes to developing video games, is that inverted controls are actually the default. Like
yeah,
when
exactly.
you're controlling the camera in a video game, pushing down goes up and pushing up goes down. And
Yeah,
so what you would consider normal or standard camera controls are actually inverted to what people consider inverted. So it's one of those weird things that, I think that the general the general audience probably doesn't have that kind of interpretation of what they consider inverted Y and X axis controls.
yeah, and it must have just been more of perception of manipulating a 3D space that one or the other just feels right or doesn't.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Southpaw. When and this is another thing because I played N64 first person shooters and Dreamcast first person shooters. I was using the left analog to look around and the right buttons to go up, down, left, and right. So moving to um, Xbox when Halo came out, I put Southpaw controls on because that's how I played on N64 and Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And but the problem with that is I remember it happened with the first Splinter Cell game that had multiplayer. It was where one was the spy and one was the mercenary. And the mercenary was first person. It didn't allow you to have inverted controls, so I never got to play that, even though I wanted to. And I think that's only happened a few more times in my gaming history where something wouldn't have the option in the menu to invert controls, but I think that always needs to be there.
And again, I think you raised the ultimate point of what we're talking about tonight is offering control to the players to change things based on their situation.
Yeah.
Whether it's inverted controls, whether it's, whether you prefer having a toggle versus having a hold trigger type thing.
Yes.
You know, some people, I think, as far as accessibility goes, it might be more beneficial to, even in a first person shooter, allow you to toggle the aim mode, the aim camera, right?
Yeah.
So like whatever first person shooter you're playing, the ability to just tap the left button and then you are in aim mode as opposed to having to hold it in order to fire. Those are questions that I think are really come down to accessibility. They are primarily player preference, but you don't know necessarily everyone's situation. You don't know whether they're playing on a 27-inch, you know, desktop screen or whether they're playing on a 50-inch, you know,
Yeah.
TV screen in
It
their
could
living room.
dictate yeah,
So
the
so
experience.
you kind of have
Yeah.
to tailor that experience in a way, you're, I'm not talking about redesigning the entire game based around every possible experience, but just give players the ability to, if it's just a slider of like,
Yeah. FOV is a big one for me. If I can turn that up all the way in
yes,
a game
yes,
where I can
please.
see, I feel way more immersed. And then speaking of the immersion, and another one, again, yeah, experience I think is a big deal. So yeah, you were talking about accessibility, and I think another part of that is experience
Yeah.
because there's that game Aliens Fire Team that came out last year, super highly anticipated for me. Wasn't all the way there. I love Alien, the Alien universe,
Yeah, you and
especially
me
that more
both.
action. Well, for me though, I like Aliens more than Aliens, so I prefer the action
The
games
one
over the.
sequel that outperformed the original.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. But so because I love Aliens so much and that idea, what I did was when I got the Aliens Fire Team game is I turned off the enemy um they had a thing where it had the enemy name and their health bar.
Yeah.
I turned all of that off because it didn't matter too much in the gameplay if I was playing to the game's like specifications in terms of what the gameplay loop is if you're successful with the game, defeating the enemies. So instead of me bothering about their health bar, I turned all that off and it made me feel more immersed in the Aliens universe. I was so happy they had the option for that because I, I did that with Immortals Phoenix Rising. That's made by Assassin's Creed people from Ubisoft. Knowing I went into that game and turned off all the HUD elements. In fact, I turned off so many HUD elements that later on in the game, I realized I was missing out on how to do some superpowers because it would be the HUD telling me.
Yeah.
But I had a much more fun time exploring in that game because I turned off all of the HUD elements saying like, you're here, top 5 quests to do, that was a very enjoyable experience. But I know I'm talking a lot and you're about to say something.
No, go for it.
I do want, and this will be real quick to segue into Elden Ring as soon as you get a chance, because this is
you're in my
related.
head. You knew I was going to bring up Elden Ring.
So with Elden Ring, and that's actually with the Souls games in general, maybe when you're playing the game, the UI is not in your face, but which people like. But I think what people will complain about is the actual menu system, the inventory. It's funny because it almost seems like the developers are purposely making a cumbersome old school menu, as we're seeing here, or they focus so much on gameplay that they don't really look at iterating on the inventory, or it's just the inventory is so convoluted anyway that they really just have things just laid out. And yes, you have to navigate through things, but you can eventually find what you're looking for. I don't know. Have you played a Souls game recently?
So the most recent one that I played was Bloodborne last year.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've followed enough Elden Ring, I've watched enough Elden Ring playthroughs that I almost feel like I beat Millennia myself, even though I've never touched a controller. But no, in all earnest, I do agree that almost the lack of UI is almost a benefit more than a hindrance, right? A lot of people complained that Souls games don't have like a mini map and a quest list and things like that. And I could go on, talking about how when I was playing Witcher 3, having, a list of quests, or even playing something like Dead Rising, where you've got all of your quests are on screen all of the time, it's like, I don't want that, because that breaks the immersion of what I'm doing in the game. But then when you break from the game, and there's almost an equal, if not greater importance on inventory management and preparing things like spells and potions that you're going to be using in combat, especially in a game like Witcher or Elden Ring, where combat is not just what you're doing on the ground, but it's how you prepare for the battle, right? It's what items you have queued up, it's what buffs and debuffs you have equipped. Your build is almost more important than what you actually do in the fight. So to me, having a clean and tidy and easy to navigate menu system is almost more important than however crisp the battle system is, which, all Souls games have a very like tight defined battle. Like the combat in Souls games is fantastic. I would never change that.
Yeah.
Don't ever change. But
yeah.
But yeah, if I'm having to make a decision that's going to affect me when it comes time for that boss fight, I don't want to get bogged down in a lot of details. And I think I almost spoiled my earlier point here by flashing the wrong screen, but with added complexity comes added UI complexity. So like if every item in Elden Ring has several different effects, obviously that's more stuff that you have to communicate to the player in an upfront way, and so you end up having less real estate to work with. Now, I would never advocate for making the game less complex because obviously video games are tailored to particular audiences, and I think that the audience of Elden Ring enjoys complexity of Elden Ring. You know, you wouldn't want to
Yep.
say, there's too many stats here that it affects. I want to cut some of that out. Like we don't need, durability. We don't need an impact on intelligence. We don't need any of that stuff. Like let's make it more simple. I don't want to make things more simple. I just want to make them more legible.
Yeah, and that makes another good point too, especially as games get more complex and maybe the menu system does require some work. I know, for instance, that Final Fantasy Origins that came out this year, uh, the action-oriented game, it's actually pretty fun, but it has this like convoluted menu system because some of the game is the menu system. Now, it reminds me of OBS, how in OBS I can go in and move menu elements around to what is better for my workflow process. So I can see future RPGs, especially heavily customized RPGs, that it's not the settings of the game that you can customize, but your inventory system, your map system. Yeah, maybe you can sort things right now in games, but I think the next step is maybe you want to have it where you press the map button and the map is on one side and your character stats are on the other. So on one screen, you're always looking at those visuals. And maybe the game says, okay, do you want to combine? Like maybe it's as simple as you press start to go into edit mode and then you can choose elements, move them around, combine screens. I think, if games started adding customizable inventory, that would be a lot of fun.
I mean, that's a pretty brilliant idea. I think that
Yeah.
now, do you think that you can go too far in that direction? To play devil's
With
advocate against ourselves, you know.
Yeah, my thought would be, is it possible, depending on how that system is developed, that someone could go in that's like more potential for a hacker, speedrunner, etc., to find an exploit? Like, as if you can modify the menu system, what if that creates a loophole of some kind?
I mean, even that aside, like, having worked in a lot of corporate environments, I can tell you that, like, for instance, NetSuite by Oracle is one of the most comprehensive products on the market when it comes to cloud computing and storing customer relation data and things like that. And it is insanely customizable. You can customize everything from the views of individual users to the views of individual teams and things like that. And this is kind of far removed from the gaming environment, and rightly so, because I will tell you that the UI for NetSuite is absolute dog shit. If you'll pardon my language, NetSuite was designed by programmers and not by designers because it's one of those systems where it's designed to be so customizable that it is almost illegible for anybody who doesn't know everything about the system. And so, for instance, if you were to have a video game that has a customizable UI, that has menu items that can be moved around and things like that, at a certain point, do you make things too generic to the point that they are no longer useful?
Yeah, I mean, that almost goes back to that point about a unified menu system in general for games.
Having
Like,
like a standardized.
yeah, and then from there modifying, because so many times I play another game with the same sort of menu options, but the layout is just, it makes no sense. It's like, especially games when it's like you access the map. Sometimes you can press start, sometimes you press select. Sometimes you have to press start then RB or whatever. And it's like, I'm surprised every game that has a map, it's not just one button's your map button. I think that's probably the most common, is that you on Xbox controller it's back, but you press the back or whatever they changed it to, and then it brings up the map, and then from there there's the different tabs. That seems to be the more universal thing. I think even Breath of the Wild is probably, Nintendo is probably the best to look at for that stuff, but Breath of the Wild had a pretty good system for
I
that.
mean, Nintendo got rid of their start select entirely, right? It's just plus and
Yeah,
minus.
I know.
Like,
Yeah. It's like, what's going on there? Yeah.
so yeah, you know, I do want to show off some of these other examples that I've got going here. One of the ones, like I said, I flashed it on screen momentarily, is you have action menu from Mario Odyssey. The reason I bring this one up is because you have a total of 17 words on the screen right now. Well, 19 if you count spin throw. But in less than 20 words, you have a menu that is easily communicable anybody who's playing this game. And one of the things that I just mentioned, like you and I were talking about, is the more complex a video game gets, the more complex the menu has to get. And this is one of those instances where maybe that's not necessarily always the case, because this is all of the actions that you perform in the game Super Mario Odyssey, but they're all communicated instead of in text as images.
Yeah.
And maybe
That's
that's
pretty good.
something about the internet age. If we're going to start talking about anthropology at large, are we sort of devolving into a society that uses hieroglyphs more than words, because hieroglyphs communicate more effectively in less space than text?
That's right. That's right. Like, these are concepts pretty much that you're being shown.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a big difference when it comes to how language is used all over the world. Especially, you're talking about a lot of ancient glyphs. Like, a lot of times people look at that as, oh, that's kind of like Stone Age communication. But no, I mean, look at like Japanese, for instance, and a lot of other languages there where they're using concepts. A lot of times you can get more feeling out of a concept than when something is saying, like, this does this. And then in your mind, we're like, well, what happens if this occurs? Like, sometimes words are way too specific that it's not enough detail.
And the best part of it is, like you said, these are things that you can look at old cave paintings and what they were trying to paint, because they didn't use words, because they didn't use language, because they used imagery. No matter what language you speak, if you look at Mario throwing a hat, you know that this button, or this series of button commands, is Mario throwing the hat. And I think that is
a good way to go about
it. Again, it's a much more simple example, because obviously there's not a lot of stats and a lot of computations that go into communicating these things as there is in like an Elden Ring game, or like I mentioned before, in a Witcher game, where you've got like your weight, the monetary amount that each item costs, the quantity that you're carrying, all of these different stats that you're trying to bottle up into a single menu item. How can we, and even then, if you are not familiar with all of the different iconography that they're using, things like the weight and the condition that the item are in, all you see is an anvil and a hammer, and they're relying on the user to make the inference that, oh, that's the weight of the item and the durability of the item.
Yeah.
And this is a minor thing, but they're all stored on one line. So it's like, what am I supposed to gather from 1.74 anvil, 100% hammer, 316? What is that, like a coin?
Yeah.
I can tell you for a fact that sitting on my couch 10 feet away from my, and look, I have a big TV, guys. I promise you, it's 60 inches. I still could not read any of this stuff in Witcher 3.
Yeah.
So I played Witcher 3 without mixing a single potion that wasn't relevant to the story, without using any oils, without doing any of that stuff, because I just had to learn how to fight really well, because I couldn't beat anything with the inventory.
And you beat the game?
Yeah. My wife and I beat it. I have to put in that stipulation because she beat several of the bosses that I couldn't. So
that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, you know what? That's very interesting about Witcher 3 because I never beat it. I think I did struggle with its presentation.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of got off of it. Some of it really had to do with the overwhelming like mission. I can go here, I can go there, and I just kind of like to wander and explore, but also this inventory system, which I think we are talking about this earlier. I want to say that they came out with a mod shortly, or people modded it shortly after to make it easier to use the inventory system, and then the developers ended up patching in some similar structure. Not only that, I think it also had to do with how you would move in the game too and get on your horse. I think there was other things they had to patch
It
in.
was a pretty
I should
buggy
get back
game.
to the game. Yeah, they apparently they were working on a remaster, and I don't know if they. I also heard that they put it on hold because they want to now do it in house instead of a third party.
Well, and Witcher 4 is on the way. So they might have just said maybe we'll release a remaster as part of like a Witcher 4
Hmm.
bundle.
Oh yeah.
You know how that goes. But yeah,
Oh, I wonder if because they switched, didn't they? Oh, I could be thinking of someone else, but switched to Unreal 5. No, I think I am thinking of, or no, did they? Because they had
if
issues
you
with their
hadn't
engine.
said it, I would have remembered because there is a developer that switched to Unreal 5 like
Remedy, I know Remedy did, and
Remedy.
they're kind of in the same vicinity of the world. I know Remedy did, and I want to say it had something to do with their engine. Maybe we had this discussion, or something to do with it's quicker for them to, um, yeah, use an engine that's already supported because they had so many issues with Cyberpunk.
Yep.
Yeah,
When
I
it's
don't
easier to
remember
hire
though.
people because
Yeah,
you can't
yeah,
hire someone to work on a proprietary engine
right.
because they don't have experience working on your proprietary engine. So, and this will probably be our topic next week. Spoiler alerts,
Mm,
but
yeah,
Games from Scratch mentioned the ongoing myth that Unity produces bad games, and it's almost like I remember when I broke my iPhone, cracked the screen. Actually, can you see that my screen is cracked?
yeah, I think
I
so. Wait,
took
hold
it
on. Let
to
me.
one of those repair shops, and the guy told me his name was Misha. Um, he was like, I see more broken iPhones than anything else. I said, why do you think that is? Do you think that like iPhone users are clumsier than Android users? He said, no, there's just more of them. So
That
the
makes
law of
sense.
averages dictates that more iPhone users are going to break their phones. And in the same way, Unity as a game engine, as a open source game engine, technically open
Yeah.
source, you can use it for free, which,
Hmm.
Unreal Engine, you can use free, Godot. There are a lot of free game engines out there. Because Unity is available for free, a lot of people make games on Unity, and therefore a
Yeah,
lot more bad games come out on Unity. And so Unity has a
that's
bad
correct.
reputation for coming out with games.
That's correct. That's the same I use for when anyone ever gets a first place victory royale in Fortnite. It's like so many people play that game that if you are into games at all, you're probably going to end up getting a victory
Yeah.
royale easily, even if you don't
If
play
you, if you play
Fortnite that
enough.
much. Yeah,
Um,
it's
Heck,
just it
even
it just
I
seems
have
to work
beaten
that
a
way.
rival on GBO2, and I am terrible at Gundam.
And yeah, well, actually, that's a good example because that game has more players than I think people anticipated.
Yeah,
Especially with it, they're still trying to get it to PC, and it's what 5 years old now or something.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Maybe
it's
3 or 4. Yeah,
player the player base of a game like Gundam Battle Operation ended up being larger than what people anticipated, and so
yeah,
I'm sure there are people that are B ranked that got their ranking off of beating me into the dirt.
yeah, yeah. Same here.
Um, but yeah, so all of that is to say that your menu UI, your heads up display UI, there's a lot of different elements of video game crafting that tend to look. Oh, sorry about that. I clicked the wrong option in OBS. But yeah, there's a lot of options that tend to get overlooked in video game development, and UI is one of the things that I think it doesn't make or break a game. A lot like sound engineering. Like, you're not gonna
Mm,
turn off a game because it has bad music, right?
really? No, I think you're
You
right.
might,
I
you
think you're
might,
right.
and that might be a topic that we
It's
discuss
the
2 weeks
yeah,
from
it's
now.
Crazy Taxi without the Offspring and Bad Religion music. I've turned that off. But no,
I
you're
defy
right
you.
though.
Um, well, and again, that's another subject that we should bring up on the podcast
I think
sometime, because
licensed content in
have
games.
have you noticed that a lot of video games don't allow you to use your own music anymore? That was my
Uh,
favorite thing about the
that
original Xbox, is I would play Fusion Frenzy and I would have my own soundtrack plugged in. Like, I don't need their music. I want to listen to my stuff.
Yeah, that is a topic I would love to dive into that I would be able to speak more on because there was a shift and I remember when that happened. It was shortly after the Xbox came out or before the 360. They did change how that
Yep.
worked and then it slowly just started disappearing.
Yep.
I mean, you can technically listen to music in games, but it's not as immersive as it used to be.
Yeah. It used to be you just drop your iTunes playlist into your game and you're good to go.
And it would sync with the game's music. And
Yes.
now it doesn't do that anymore. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
And let's face it, where it all came from is licensing
Yeah.
deals for the music that they were using. So,
Yeah. Well, cool.
well, did you have any closing thoughts about user interface and user experience video games?
No, I think we touched on all the things that I think are important. Really, I think in the future, I think developers should try to grasp more of a what am I trying to say? We've used the word before, but a similar menu system
Yeah,
across games.
either standardize the menu system,
Standardize. Yeah.
or make it more customizable, more like tailored.
Yeah, because I think both. Because a lot of times, especially you see Microsoft jumping in with accessibility options for disabled players, for people that it could be color blindness, like you brought up before, or it could just be controllers because maybe missing a limb or some fingers. And I feel like if there was this all encompassing plugin for multiple engines that had all of the standard color blindness controls, controller editing options, etc., and then that's just in every game, people would then quickly be able to play any game, change what they need to quickly, and get in.
Yeah.
I can just think of being at a shared. I remember going to gaming conventions, being next in line to play a game. It's like, okay, I got to invert the controls. What's the sensitivity? Blah blah blah. And like, what? I don't know this game yet, so I don't know where I got to navigate to find the controls. But if they made it universal, people could get into their games quicker.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know what? Even just making certain things open source, because, like, for instance, there
Yeah.
are web browsers that will automatically convert websites dark mode, for instance.
Hmm.
Like
Oh, I like
like
that.
Opera will force dark mode. Even if a website doesn't have a dark mode enabled,
Oh,
it'll
wow.
just invert colors for you. So, is that one of those things where, do we have like user accounts that are almost cloud based, where, as soon as you log into a game in Xbox, because again, this is one of those things where, as someone that has a disability, you don't want to have to log into a menu every time you load up a new game and change all the settings to make sure that they fit your needs. Is it one
Right.
of those things that, like you said, with standardization and with user profile accounts, can we tailor those things and say, hey, this player we know has these issues, and therefore the controllers are going to be automatically inverted, and like,
Yeah, considering both on PlayStation and Xbox, they do already have controller settings you can change by default. That works not only across games but even the UI. I think they could go deeper,
yeah.
making it where between Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo they are the same, and that it's only make it to where you can choose what affects gameplay versus menus.
And I will
Because
say
I think
Unity has
that's
done a good job with that, with their new input system, where,
oh
and this isn't relevant to UI at all yet, but with their input system, you can set it up to where certain behaviors can be triggered by the north, south, east, west buttons instead of, the proprietary X square circle triangle or
Yeah.
XABY buttons.
North, south, east, west. I've never thought about a universal way to speak of the buttons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've started doing that with my wife, and she absolutely hates it.
Oh.
Because we're sitting here, like I said, I'm not talking about an easy mode for Dark Souls because I need an easy mode for Mario, like 3D World. And we're sitting here
Oh,
playing
yeah.
3D World, and she's like, "Oh, how do I jump over that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, hit the south button." And she goes, "You're an idiot."
No, but I like that. I think that should be something else that is used when speaking about controls universally, since the platform holders are all going to have their different setup.
Like you said, it's all about standardizing our language of communication between platforms.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think that this has been an awesome topic to talk about. Obviously, we have
Yes.
branched out from just a mere UI in just like you said, not even just UI, but like how we actually interface with the game itself in
Yeah,
terms
this
of our
experience
controlling. Yeah,
the experience we can get out of it. Like UI lends to experience and vice versa.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Very
Sweet.
good.
Well, hey, I feel bad because we missed out on a lot of chats, but thank you guys for hanging out. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Like I said, we had a lot to talk about, but in case you don't know, we actually do record a podcast tomorrow live at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Central Time, the Gundam
Yep.
Explained podcast, which should be pretty exciting. I think we've had a lot of Gundam news in the last couple of weeks, and so
There
I'm
might be
excited
even more tomorrow because the Comic Con is tomorrow. I think the San Diego Comic Con starts this tomorrow or something.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
so I think there's a Witch from Mercury panel tomorrow, so that we might get some details from that.
So yeah, get down in the description below, subscribe to the Gundam Explained YouTube channel, and check us out tomorrow evening because we are definitely
Yep.
going to have some stuff to talk about for sure.
Oh yeah.
Adam, thank you as always for joining me and
Oh
for
yeah.
elaborating, sharing your breadth of video game knowledge because again, you have so much more experience with a wider variety of games that I love pilfering your precious
Yeah.
brain for nuggets of
It's fun.
information.
It's almost like a challenge. Bring some up. Oh, I have a reference. Yeah. But yeah, no, thanks for having me, and it's always good to see everyone in the chat too.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again, guys. And if I don't see you tomorrow, then I will catch you next week. Peace.
All right, see y'all.